During the latter part of the Second World War, the Allies used mass bombing raids to attempt to get the Nazi government to submit, as many towns and cities were destroyed as the Allied air forces dropped their payload. Many of the places that were targeted were of strategic importance to the German war effort, for example factories. However, today we look at the savage story of an incident that occurred on August 26, 1944 in Russelsheim in Germany. Join us today as we look at the brutal execution of the Russelsheim Massacre, and remember as always to support our channel, please make sure to subscribe. But now a message from today's video sponsor Warpath. Warpath is a fantastic free-to-play war strategy game intertwined with the story of World War II. It's available for free on the Google Play and App Store, and you can experience many class and epic battles such as the Normandy landings. Playing Warpath is like experiencing a real battlefield. From small guns, tanks and warplanes, the realism and tactical aspect of the game allows you to enjoy the thrill of manipulating the battlefield to your advantage. Thanks to Warpath's recent update that hits in September, you will get a realistic experience of modern Air Force warfare. You will meet the real Mustang fighter and enjoy its sharpness and raw firsthand. There are 42 new fighter and bomber units for you to collect, and you can enhance your aircraft as you wish, making it stronger to wipe out the enemy's planes. In warfare, air forces play a pivotal role, and they will also in Warpath. Firstly, it allows the battlefield to be suppressed with air-to-ground strikes. Secondly, it creates a three-dimensional battlefield. And thirdly, it allows air and land units to work together to achieve battlefield domination. In Warpath, the new air forces give the game a completely fantastic and fresh aspect to the battlefield. You can even meet Jean-Claude Van Damme in Warpath. Find him to unlock exclusive commanders and aircraft units. Warpath is offering a brilliant offer for our viewers, so head down to the link in the video description and use my code to get a great offer, and welcome to the battlefield. During the Second World War, Russelsheim was an industrial town that played a rather pivotal role to the German war effort. The Opel plant was situated there, which was targeted a number of times by different Allied bombing raids, and in particular by the Royal Air Force. It today is still a typical industrial town east of Mainz, and with a population of around 60,000. However, despite what Russelsheim is like today, the town holds a dark secret. The RAF at times followed a policy of nighttime bombing raids, in which they bombed areas to attempt to severely damage armaments production for the Germans. The United States Army Air Force relied on precision bombing during the day. The Russelsheim incident or massacre took place following one of these bombing raids. On the afternoon of August 24, 1944, a B-24 called Wham Bam Thank You Mom was shot down whilst taking part in a bombing attack on an airfield in Hanover. On board were 9 airmen, and the plane was being commanded by 2nd Lieutenant Norman J. Rogers Jr. After being hit with German anti-aircraft fire, the crew parachuted out of the aircraft in time and touched down near to Hutterup. A lookout nearby had spotted the plane going down and alerted the local military near to the airfield to find the downed crew, and one of the airmen had serious injuries in his abdomen caused by the flak. After landing, this crew member, Staff Sergeant Forrest W. Brininstall, was tended to by an elderly couple, who were then given his parachute in exchange. It wasn't long before the whole crew were captured by the Germans, and they were then taken into interrogation nearby in a town hall in Greven. After that, the crew members were taken to an airbase for the night, and Brininstall was taken to hospital for medical help. The next morning he stayed there, and the other captured POWs were loaded onto a train to the Dallogluff north of Frankfurt. As the train stopped, the German people greatly slandered and shouted abuse at the American airmen, claiming they were terror flyers and they were also spat at. This was all caused by the fear that the Allied air forces had inspired with the night and day bombing raids. Now, around 24 hours after the B-24 was shot down, in the evening of the 25th of August, the RAF sent a sortie of 116 Lancaster bombers to attack the Opel factory in Russelsheim. They had planned to destroy the factory and much of the town. In the bombing raid, they dropped almost 700,000 kilograms of bombs and more than 400,000 incendiary bombs on the town, destroying the plant, the rail tracks and large areas of the city. Civilian houses were set on fire, and it was clear that the residents of the town were incredibly angry and scared by what they had seen and what happened to their town, reduced to fire. Now, on the 26th of August, the American captured bomber crew were en route to their destination, but the night before the RAF had damaged the train tracks, forcing them off the train, and the US airmen were then forced to walk to Russelsheim to get another train to take them to their destination. They were escorted by 2 German soldiers. However, as they made their way through the town of Russelsheim, the civilians there wrongly thought that they were in fact Canadian airmen who had took part in the bombing raid that destroyed their town. The townspeople then became incredibly angry, and they quickly became a violent mob. 2 women whipped up the crowd screaming, "There they are, the terror flyers. Tear them to pieces, beat them to death. They destroyed our houses." One of the airmen replied in German. However, a woman threw a brick at the Americans before a riot broke out and they were attacked with rocks, sticks, shovels and hammers. 3 workers from the bombed Opel factory arrived with iron bars and beat the men to near death. Air Raid Warden Joseph Hartgen, who saw the mob, joined in, presumably after he had helped to deal with the bombing raid and the damage. He was armed with a pistol, and after many of the airmen collapsed from their beatings, Hartgen ordered them to be lined up in the gutter. He then took his pistol out and fired his bullets into 6 of the airmen. He ran out of ammunition though, and left 2 of the men alive, with 6 of them being killed. The men left alive were William M. Adams and Sidney Eugene Brown. They were then all put into a cart and taken to a local cemetery, but during the attacks an air raid occurred with the mob running for cover, and the 2 who weren't shot managed to escape and were later taken to a prisoner of war camp. 6 of the airmen had been shot dead by Hartgen and were savagely beaten to death by the angry mob. There were more than 100 people involved in the murders and the summary execution of the men, and also the burial of the US airmen in a mass grave. In March 1945, the 3rd Army took Russelsheim, and they were told that the airmen had been murdered by citizens inside of the town. Military tribunals had been set up to try anyone involved in the killing or committing crimes against Allied POWs, and this technically would mean that those 100 people who took part were war criminals, liable to be executed. It was initially believed the crew were British, however later it was discovered they were American. 11 residents of Russelsheim were placed on trial for the crime in July 1945, and the trial was the first war crimes trial in Germany, taking place before the more well-known Nuremberg trials. The defendants claimed that Goebbels' propaganda had caused them to be indoctrinated to carry out the killings on any Allied airmen for the devastation caused in the bombing raids. The prosecution stated how the men and women involved were all grown adults, and if they decided to commit murder, then they were as responsible as any other who commits a crime. Their trial lasted 6 days, and witnesses were called who told of the events. They told of the Opel employees bludgeoning the airmen to death with metal rods, and they then told of Hartgen with his pistol executing them, firing his pistol into the helpless and suffering men. Hartgen himself was accused of horrific acts of violence and shooting them in cold blood, and of those who were accused, 5 of the 11 were sentenced to death for their crimes, with the rest being imprisoned for the murder. On the 10th of November 1945, those 5 who were condemned to death were to make their way to their execution. In a prison in Brussels where they'd been held, a gallows had been created for the executions to take place on. Josef Hartgen, Johannes Siepel, Philip Gudlich, Friedrich Wurst and Johannes Opper were all led to the gallows for their crimes in murdering the Allied airmen in the Russelsheim Massacre. A gallows stood inside of the prison yard, and on top of the platform stood a number of Allied guards and staff along with an executioner. The men, before they walked to the steps on the scaffold, had their arms tied behind their backs, and they were then helped up the dozen or so steps. In front of a group of witnesses, they were given a final chance for their last words, and interestingly, a number of the condemned even received a final talk with a priest before the trapdoor was released. Identity was confirmed, and then a black hood was fastened over the defendants' heads before the noose was placed over them. In a matter of seconds, the lever was pulled, and then those men who were prominent in the murders of the American airmen were brought to justice. Interestingly, the 2 men who did manage to escape from the cart did survive the war. Later, a 6th German man, Otto Stolz, was convicted of the crime and was executed as he was found guilty of beating the airmen and helping Hartgen load the bodies onto the cart. He was also proven guilty of beating a number of airmen to death who were still alive after the gunshot. The Russelsheim Massacre and the subsequent executions that centre around it are rather different to look at. It's clear that the Allies succeeded in their quest to invoke fear inside of the German population. However, the sheer fear inspired drove the people of that town to massacre POWs. The main perpetrators of the murders of the Russelsheim Massacre were finally brought to justice, However, so many who took part that day never saw their day inside of a courtroom for their crimes. Once again, thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.